Simultaneously, Allies and Germans moved against each other's flanks. So the war, which had burned its way southward so swiftly, rolled back northward like a forest fire under a changing wind. The flames fed upon new countrysides, Picardy, Artois, Flanders. This was the race to the sea. All through these days of frustration on the Aisne, by railway, on horseback, on foot, thousands by bicycle, the soldiers of both sides were on the move. Populations which had hoped to be spared were driven before the storm. And in the north, the thunder of great guns was heard again. On September the 28th, the Germans began a violent bombardment of the outer forts of Antwerp. The King of the Belgians, with his army and his government, had taken refuge in this great port. Antwerp was heavily defended by rings of powerful forts, with some 150,000 Belgian soldiers inside them. On October the 1st, the London Times said,
"We do not think that there is any need to worry about Antwerp."
But the next day, the British government heard that the Belgian army was proposing to abandon the city. The news, says Sir Winston Churchill, seemed not only terrible, but incomprehensible. Churchill himself sped across the sea. He promised the Belgians Allied support and persuaded them to wait. Naval armored cars came up the coast from Ostend, and troops of the newly formed 7th Division, using any sort of transport they could find. Then at Antwerp itself, Royal Marines of the Naval Division landed. They went into the line at once and were soon under bombardment.
Some shrapnel, a few high explosives, and then high in the sky, a train-like rumble and whistle, ending with an explosion in the city of Antwerp, smoke and flames. An old hand said, "Them's Howitzer shells. The bastards must be 12 miles away." At intervals all day, these train-like shells came over and burst in the city of Antwerp. Late in the afternoon, the oil tanks by the dockside were hit. We sat, watched, waited, felt hopeless and useless.
For 3 days, the unequal struggle went on. But the Allies had nothing to match the heavy German howitzers which had already battered down Liège and Namur. On October the 7th, the inevitable end was in sight. The Belgian government left for Ostend, and the field army began its withdrawal down the coast. With them, once more, went the pitiful refugees, escaping as best they could, by any route they could, from the German invaders whose cruel reputation had gone before them. The future of Belgium was all in shadows now. On October the 9th, the Germans entered Antwerp. Now the flames of war licked down the coast to join the great blaze of battle from the south. The Belgian army fell back to Dixmude, where it joined a magnificent detachment of French Marines. And division by division, the British Expeditionary Force, transported from the Aisne, was coming into action, near the old Flemish market town of Ypres. Their arrival filled the last remaining gap in a line of battle from the sea to Switzerland. It was the final act of the War of Movement. At Ypres, the last great encounter battle of the Western Front opened with glittering promise for both sides. General Foch was now in charge of all the Allied forces in the north. He was quite clear about what he had to do.
The question was, would we have the time and did we possess the means of effecting a breakthrough before the enemy could complete defensive measures against which we would be more or less impotent. This was the effort we were about to make. It was an attempt to exploit the last vestige of our victory on the Marne.
The Germans now had a new commander. Von Moltke had failed, and now Erich von Falkenhayn had replaced him as Chief of Staff. He too was clear about his task. The Allied threat to the German right wing must be eliminated.
If this at least was not done, then the drastic action against England and her sea traffic, with submarines, aeroplanes and airships, which was being prepared as a reply to England's war of starvation, was impossible. It was also questionable whether the occupied territory in northern France and western Belgium could be held.
The prize, concluded Falkenhayn, was worth the stake. For both sides, the stake at Ypres consisted of everything they had. The sustained intensity of this battle was something new. Crisis after crisis flared along the line. In the north, the Belgians were hard-pressed, defending the last few square miles of their native soil from the invader. They took a terrible decision: to open the sluice gates of the river Isère and let in the sea over land which had been reclaimed by the labor of centuries. A French officer watched the result.
Little by little, the soil became spongy, and the ditches began to fill. On the 29th, we could see the water rise, but it was only on the 31st that we had the impression of an entirely different landscape. Over this new landscape, veiled by a steady mist, settled a death-like silence.
The Germans, too, were willing to mortgage their future. They flung into the battle divisions of young student volunteers, wildly enthusiastic but only half-trained. They were mown down by the fire of the British regulars. The Germans called their fate the slaughter of the innocents. Veteran units also suffered heavy losses.
We ran approximately 100 yards when we came under a machine gun fire which was so terrific that the losses were so staggering that we got orders to lie down and to seek shelter. Nobody dared to lift his head because the very moment the machine gunners saw any movement, they let fly. And then the British artillery opened up. And the corpses and the heads and the arms and the legs flew about, and we were cut to pieces.
The British expeditionary force, pounded by the German guns, was also cut to pieces. And these men were irreplaceable. They were Britain's only trained troops. By the time the battle was over, the old British army was gone past recall. Its losses in this battle totaled nearly 60,000. Already, before it ended, the consequences were seen. The Territorials made their appearance. The London Scottish were the first territorial infantry to enter the fight. They lost 60% of their numbers in their first battle. Beside them, on October the 29th, arrived the first units of the Indian Corps. The citizen army and the Empire were already having to replace the regulars. Regulars, Territorials, Indians, French, Belgians. The French outnumbered all the rest. Together, they beat off all the German attacks. Their own attacks failed also. Captain Rudolf Binding of the German Dragoons wrote in a letter,
"The war has got stuck into a gigantic siege on both sides. The whole front is one endless fortified trench. Neither side has the force to make a decisive push."
On November the 2nd, he was even gloomier.
"Everyone is getting ready for a winter campaign. As far as I can judge, there is no possibility of an early finish."
The thought grew upon him with all its cheerless implications. November the 8th.
"We are still stuck here for perfectly good reasons. One might as well say for perfectly bad reasons."
By the middle of November, his mind was made up.
This business may last for a long time.
The impossible